We are going to turn now to the search for Nancy Guthrie, who disappeared, as you know, from her home on February 1st. The urgent investigation.
Nearly 3 weeks have passed since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her Tucson home, and what began as a local missing persons case has now evolved into one of the most closely watched investigations in Arizona.
Police dispatchers sent out an alert about a woman hanging out of the window of a car, and she was screaming.
The caller is advising they saw a female out of a vehicle window screaming.
A quiet neighborhood, a respected elderly woman, and a disappearance that left behind almost no immediate answers, except for one haunting discovery that investigators cannot ignore.
It's done. We're done with the residents. We have turned that over to the family.
An unidentified DNA sample found inside her own home. As the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Office process nearly 50,000 tips and pursue advanced forensic testing, including genetic genealogy, the case has shifted from a search for a missing woman to a high-stakes effort to identify someone who may have stepped into her life without leaving a name. Surveillance footage of a masked, armed figure, a brief detention of a person of interest, and questions about possible border movement have only deepened the mystery surrounding what happened in those critical hours. This is not just another true crime headline. It is an active FBI investigation involving cutting-edge DNA analysis, public appeals, and a $200,000 combined reward for information. And at the center of it all is a single urgent question: who left that DNA behind? And what does it reveal about the fate of Nancy Guthrie? If you care about true crime updates, missing persons cases, real-time forensic breakthroughs, stay with us as we break down every confirmed detail in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie and examine where this investigation stands right now. The question that now defines this case. Nearly 3 weeks after Nancy Guthrie vanished from her Tucson home, investigators find themselves navigating a case defined less by what is visible and more by what refuses to identify itself, and at the center of that uncertainty is a single, deeply unsettling question. How does someone leave behind undeniable biological proof of their presence, yet remain completely unknown to the systems designed to recognize them? Nancy disappeared from a quiet residential neighborhood less than 2 hours from the Arizona-Mexico border, a community where routines tend to repeat and unfamiliar activity often stands out. In areas like this, neighbors often remember unfamiliar vehicles, unusual sounds, or subtle disruptions in daily rhythm, which is why investigators initially focused so heavily on reconstructing even the smallest movements in the hours surrounding her disappearance. From the earliest stages, deputies canvassed nearby homes for security footage, requested access to private camera systems, and mapped out a precise timeline using digital data and call records in an effort to narrow the window in which something may have occurred. From the earliest hours of the investigation, law enforcement moved deliberately, beginning where most missing persons cases begin, inside the family circle. Homes were searched. Phones and vehicles were examined. Digital records were reviewed. Financial transactions were analyzed for irregularities. Sheriff Chris Nanos later confirmed that Nancy's immediate family members, along with their spouses, were thoroughly investigated and ultimately cleared, describing how they had been put through the ringer as detectives pursued every conceivable internal lead before shifting their focus outward. That clearance was not a formality. It was a turning point. By eliminating the most statistically common scenario in missing persons investigations, authorities signaled that whatever happened to Nancy likely involved someone beyond her closest relationships. It also reinforced the methodical nature of the inquiry. Investigators were not chasing speculation or public pressure. They were building a framework grounded in verification, supported by forensic review and corroborated timelines. And once the inner circle was ruled out, the case widened. And with that widening came both opportunity and complexity, because external actors introduce variables that are far harder to control. As tips began pouring in, eventually reaching nearly 20,000 to the FBI alone and close to 50,000 when combined with local reporting, the challenge became less about generating information and more about filtering it. The volume itself reflected national attention and public concern, but quantity does not equal clarity. Each submission required evaluation, categorization, and cross-referencing against existing evidence. Behind the scenes, analysts worked in coordinated teams to flag patterns, eliminate duplications, and prioritize leads that aligned with known timelines or geographic data, knowing that buried within thousands of reports could be a single detail capable of shifting the investigation's trajectory. Yet for all the interviews conducted, footage reviewed, digital trails reconstructed, and community outreach efforts expanded, one development would soon eclipse every other lead, transforming the case from a search driven by interviews and surveillance into one anchored in science, a person of interest and the limits of suspicion. As investigators expanded their scope, attention briefly centered on Luke Daly, a 37-year-old man who lived only a few miles from Nancy's residence. He was detained during a traffic stop and later questioned at his home after authorities executed search warrants connected to the case. The operation drew immediate public attention, particularly when the Pima County Sheriff's Office identified Daly as a person of interest, a phrase that carries weight but stops short of formal accusation. In high-profile missing persons cases, that label can quickly take on a life of its own, especially in the age of social media, where speculation often outruns verified information. Within hours of the announcement, online forums and local community groups began dissecting every available detail, illustrating how quickly public narratives can form around limited facts. Law enforcement officials are acutely aware of that dynamic, which is why the distinction between a suspect and a person of interest is more than semantic. It is legal, procedural, and deeply consequential. It is important to understand what that designation means in practical terms. A person of interest is someone whose proximity, actions, or circumstances warrant scrutiny, yet for whom investigators lack sufficient evidence to establish probable cause for arrest. In Daly's case, neither he nor his 77-year-old mother, who also lived in the residence, was arrested. He cooperated with authorities, was questioned, and ultimately released. His attorney later issued a formal statement, asserting that he had no involvement in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance and no knowledge of her whereabouts. Search warrants in cases like this are typically granted when investigators demonstrate to a judge that there is reasonable cause to believe evidence relevant to a crime may be located at a specific property. That threshold is significantly lower than the standard required for an arrest, which must meet probable cause. The execution of a warrant, therefore, does not equate to proof of wrongdoing. It reflects an investigative step designed to either confirm or eliminate a possibility. The absence of charges did not make the inquiry irrelevant. Evidence collected from the residence required processing, and forensic analysis takes time, particularly when laboratories must prioritize multiple active investigations. Sheriff Nanos made it clear that the investigation remained active and that no single lead, once developed, would be dismissed prematurely. However, the fact that Daly was released without arrest indicated that investigators were not prepared to anchor the case to him without stronger evidentiary support. For the public, the episode was both dramatic and inconclusive. A significant search had taken place, yet it produced no immediate resolution, reinforcing how complex real-world investigations can be compared to the rapid conclusions often portrayed in television crime dramas. For law enforcement, however, it represented something different. A confirmation that procedure, not pressure, would dictate direction. The investigation continued to move forward, and as physical evidence from multiple locations was processed with increasing precision, a discovery emerged that would redirect the entire narrative. Inside Nancy's home, investigators identified a DNA sample that did not belong to her, did not match any known family member, and did not correspond to any obvious associate. That finding altered the landscape of the case in a way no interview or surveillance clip had managed to do, shifting the focus from circumstantial proximity to measurable biological evidence that demanded a far more sophisticated forensic response. The unmatched DNA and the turn to genetic genealogy. The discovery of unidentified DNA inside Nancy Guthrie's home introduced a powerful and unsettling reality. Someone else had been present, and that presence had left a biological signature. Initial testing confirmed that the sample did not match Nancy herself, nor any immediate family members. When the profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, it returned no match. This absence was not trivial. CODIS contains DNA profiles from known offenders and arrestees, but it represents only a small percentage of the overall population, often estimated between 4 and 6%. A failure to match within CODIS suggests that the individual behind the sample may have no prior criminal record, or at least none that placed their DNA into federal databases. In other words, investigators were dealing with someone who, from a law enforcement perspective, did not officially exist. Faced with that limitation, authorities turned to genetic genealogy, an advanced forensic method that compares DNA markers against public and private ancestry databases to identify distant relatives. Instead of searching for a direct match, this approach searches for shared genetic segments, cousins, extended family members, fragments of lineage that can be assembled into a family tree. Through painstaking research, genealogists analyze public records, cross-reference family lines, and gradually narrow the pool of possible individuals. The technique has gained national attention in recent years, most famously in the Golden State Killer case, where decades-old crimes were solved after investigators used genealogy databases to identify Joseph DeAngelo through distant relatives. Similar strategies have led to breakthroughs in other cases involving suspects with no prior criminal records in the United States, demonstrating that anonymity in traditional databases does not guarantee permanent invisibility. In Nancy's case, genetic genealogy represents both promise and patience. The process can take weeks or longer. Laboratories must ensure the sample is uncontaminated and that quality control standards are met before comparisons begin. Success also depends on whether relatives of the unknown individual have uploaded their DNA to accessible databases, something investigators cannot control. Nonetheless, the decision to pursue this method signals confidence in the evidence. The unidentified DNA is not speculative. It is tangible, measurable, and potentially traceable. While forensic experts work to reconstruct a family tree for an unknown individual, another thread of the investigation continues to unfold through surveillance footage and geographic analysis. Surveillance, geography, and the possibility of movement. Among the most compelling pieces of evidence released publicly is surveillance footage depicting a masked individual standing on the front steps of Nancy's home while armed. Though limited in clarity, the images have fueled both public interest and investigative focus. Authorities believe the figure could be central to understanding what occurred, and the presence of a weapon suggests planning rather than chance. Not all surveillance has been made public. Sheriff Nanos has indicated that additional footage exists, and he has also suggested the possibility that more than one person may have been involved. That possibility expands the scope of the investigation from a single actor to a potentially coordinated effort. Analysts continue to review every available frame, studying posture, gait, clothing, and subtle behavioral cues that might help narrow identification. In cases where visual clarity is limited, even minor physical patterns can prove significant. The proximity of Nancy's home to the U.S.-Mexico border has also generated discussion about whether she could have been transported across. Authorities have consistently stated that there is no evidence supporting that theory. Official border crossings are heavily monitored with cameras and surveillance systems that record vehicles and individuals. Federal agencies have coordinated with Mexican authorities from the outset, underscoring the seriousness with which the possibility was evaluated. Retired FBI agent Greg Rogers has noted that cartel-controlled regions maintain strict awareness of activity within their territories, suggesting that a high-profile kidnapping in such areas would likely draw attention. While theoretical desert routes exist, they are rugged and dangerous, particularly for transporting an elderly woman. The logistical challenges make such a scenario difficult, though not impossible, and investigators continue to weigh possibilities carefully rather than dismiss them outright. At the same time, law enforcement has canvassed local businesses, including gun shops, showing images and names to determine whether anyone recognizes the masked figure or individuals connected to the case. This traditional door-to-door strategy operates alongside modern tools such as drone surveillance, advanced data analytics, and low-frequency signal detection devices capable of identifying emissions from medical implants, like pacemakers within limited ranges. The integration of old and new methods reflects the complexity of the investigation, a case that demands both technological precision and human memory. Community, technology, and the search for a name. As the investigation approaches the 3-week mark, it stands at the intersection of science, surveillance, and public cooperation. The FBI and Crime Stoppers have each offered $100,000 in rewards for information leading to answers, reinforcing the urgency and encouraging individuals with even minor details to come forward. Public involvement remains a crucial element, not because authorities lack direction, but because community awareness can surface insights that technology alone cannot generate. The sheer volume of tips has required sophisticated data management systems capable of sorting and prioritizing information. Partnerships with major technology companies have enhanced digital footprint analysis and video review, allowing investigators to process large data sets more efficiently. At the same time, forensic specialists continue their meticulous work on the unidentified DNA profile, aware that a single genealogical connection could transform the case overnight. What makes this investigation particularly striking is how it illustrates the tension between identity and anonymity in the modern era. A person may avoid criminal databases, conceal their face behind a mask, and leave no immediate digital trail, yet a microscopic biological trace can anchor them to a family tree stretching back generations. Genetic genealogy challenges the assumption that absence from official systems guarantees invisibility. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains unresolved, but it is not static. It is an active inquiry powered by layered strategies: family clearance, evaluation of persons of interest, forensic escalation, surveillance analysis, border coordination, and community outreach. Each element builds upon the others, creating a framework designed to convert uncertainty into identification. The unanswered question now is not whether investigators have direction, but whether the unidentified DNA will yield a name and, with it, a clearer understanding of what happened inside Nancy's home. If that breakthrough occurs, it will not be sudden luck, but the result of sustained, methodical effort. As developments continue to unfold, public engagement remains essential. Share your perspective in the comments below. Do you believe genetic genealogy will ultimately provide the decisive lead? Or do you think another piece of evidence will surface first? Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed as this investigation progresses. Because in cases like this, continued attention helps ensure that the search for answers does not fade.